God, which we must. We have to have one religion, one nation under God, and one religion under God.
Good evening. That was the former member of the Trump administration, former security director Michael Flynn, who talks about and has talked about how in the next administration, if it's his people, that there should be one religion in this country, and it's what they call Christian nationalism. They say Christianity, but it's really Christian nationalism, and it's a very real possibility and a very real danger. So I'm saying hello to you and welcome to this conversation where we talk about the difference between Christianity and Christian nationalism, which is a big part of what's in and under around Project 2025. We really need to know that because people don't really get the difference between the two, and one is vastly different than the other. I'm Reverend Smith, Susan Smith. Welcome to our second critical conversation on Project 2025 and how what's proposed in Project 2025 will affect all of us, but especially Black people. My partner.
Hi, I'm Reverend Marcus Tabb. I'm the co-director of the Office of Clergy and Leadership Resource Development with the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. And tonight we will discuss the difference between Christianity and Christian nationalism. What you heard at the opening was the desire of the Republicans or MAGA as it concerns to freedom of religion.
Right. And that means that if they have their way, there will be no freedom of religion. The word Christian is used by those who want one religion, by those people who want one religion. But what is really being proposed is Christian nationalism. So we're here tonight to examine the difference between the two. And what we hope you will be able to wrestle with is how you would feel if your freedom to practice your religion was taken away. But before we get into our discussion, I just have to pause for a moment to offer condolences to the families of Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee and Bernice Johnson Reagan. Giants in my life, really, giants. They've done so much, but both of whom made their transition last week. And we also include in our prayers Vice President Kamala Harris, who now stands poised to become the Democratic candidate for President of the United States. So we're honored to have here tonight two outstanding guests for this evening's discussion. The Reverend Dr. Aubrey Hendricks is a professor, theologian, and author of several books, including my favorite, The Politics of Jesus, and his most recent, Christians Against Christianity, How Right-Wing Evangelicals Are Destroying Our Nation and Our Faith. He is the most widely read and perhaps the most influential African-American biblical scholar in America today. He has been a Wall Street investment executive, a theological seminary president, a distinguished senior fellow at the Democracy Collaborative think tank, and served in the United States Department of State Religion and Foreign Policy Working Group under Secretaries of State Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. Currently, he teaches religion and African American and African diasporic studies at Columbia University, is an advisory board member at the Institute of Christian Socialism, and a trustee of the Public Religion Research Institute. Welcome, Dr. Hendricks. Our second guest for this evening is the Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould, who is the director of Power Building at the Faith in Action National Network. I call her my sister from another mother. A capacity builder, Dr. Gould was active in the aftermath of the Michael Brown shooting in Ferguson, Missouri, where she organized faith leaders from around the country to challenge the ongoing issue of police violence. A womanist public theologian, Dr. Gould intersects theology, restorative justice, and community organizing, and has been studying Christian nationalism and its potential impact in this country. She is an itinerant elder in the AME Church, serves on the staff of Metropolitan AME Church in DC, and served as a pastor for 10 years in Missouri. She is a church builder and masterful negotiator, and her organizing prowess was seen in the movie Rigged, the Voter Suppression Playbook. We are honored to have you, Dr. Gould.
Thank you, my sister.
You are welcome.
Always good to be with the Proctor family. Thank you.
And I'm just tickled because you're here, even though you're on a hiatus away from the riffraff of life. So thank you for being here. But let's begin with observations from each of you. And we'll start with you, Dr. Gould. From each of you on what is going on in this country as concerns the rise or prevalence of Christian nationalism. I'd like for you to share with our viewers the difference between the two, Christian nationalism and Christianity, and why knowing the difference is important. And for those of you who are watching us online, as you hear these presentations, jot your questions down. You can put them in the Q&A, and we're going to get to your questions as we get to that part of the program. So Dr. Gold, it's on you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to share a few slides in a couple of minutes, but before I do that, in 1995, our beloved ancestor Toni Morrison, in a lecture at Howard University, talked about like the 10 steps for a fascist regime to be able to take control. A few of those steps, I won't read all 10. I can also drop a link to that in the chat. But a few of those steps were around constructing an internal enemy, isolating, demonizing that enemy, enlisting and creating sources and distributors of information who are willing to reinforce the demonizing process because it is profitable, because it grants power, and because it works. She went on to say, the 10th thing that she said, and by all costs, maintain silence. Maintain at all cost silence. That was in 1995, right? I remind people of that mostly to say that this is not a new phenomenon. Some of us have been kind of misinformed by this and really thinking that this is a Trump era phenomenon, but it is really not. The reality is that Christian nationalism, in some ways, were at the foundation of this country. This fraudulent notion that these pious Christian men, some would call the founders, some would call the framers, I call them those who enslaved my ancestors, that they, working on behalf of God, founded a country that was just for their benefit. And there are those who believe right now that it still should be for their benefit, right? And so this is not at all new phenomenon. I'm going to share a slide with you, hopefully now. When we think about white Christian nationalism, and I choose to always put the white in the Christian nationalism. I want to name that I'm not talking about white people, but it is because of how whiteness and this fraudulent notion of white superiority or white supremacy is actually anchored, the foundational tenet of Christian nationalism. It's this way, again, of understanding the world, believing that white is supreme over all things. And it centers Christianity over all things. And I know this is the Proctor family, which I'm proud to be a part of, and we love Jesus. But as Jesus says, I got some other sheep and some other pastures, right? And so this country was not designed by God, and is not just for the benefit of the few. Some would say that it's a political problem, a social problem. I believe that it really is a theological problem, tracing really all the way back to the 1400s, when we had the doctrine of discovery. That wasn't a political figure that actually came up with the doctrine of discovery. That was the Pope, right? Who told the nations in Europe to go and subdue, right? Subdue everything that was not like them. And added a line about perpetual slavery, which is where our ancestors, for many of us, come in. And so if it is a theological problem, it is going to take theological tools to actually try and solve that problem. There's this, they would call it a deep story or a myth. I grew up in a household back in the day, you couldn't say lie, but they gone, I can say it now. It's a lie, right? It is built on these lies that have actually become, for some of us, spiritual lies, and that people have embodied these spiritual lies. the lie that white is right. The lie that white is pure, and to be black, to be anything else, is to be less than. We suffer from all of these inferiority complexes because these lies have been theologized. They have been spewed even through the misinterpretation of scripture to make us believe that, right? And so they've created a narrative that says that there's some other folk. We heard it in the debate, folk talking about the wrong thing on the debate, but that's another story. We heard it in the debate when it talked about the millions of folk coming to take the black jobs, right? And so it is this sense that somebody's cutting in the line in front of you, and folk wanting to take America back to something that America, quite frankly, never honestly really was. Again, not a new phenomenon at all. There's been, I know last week you all talked about Project 2025, which is a living manifesto of white Christian nationalism. And really, it targets everything and everybody that's not white, male, wealthy, and at least appears to be heterosexual. And so that's what we have to think about. And it is a great collaboration. The Heritage Foundation has collaborated. A whole nother story. Look up the 7 Mountains if you don't know about that. The reason at a particular recent convention you had entertainers and all of these other people is because it is intended to actually intersect with every section of our lives. There's collaboration and cooperation. This kind of unholy trinity of white Christian nationalism is around voter suppression, public education, and when I say immigration, I'm not just talking about people at a particular border. There are African immigrants in this country as well. Again, all of the folk that they believe don't belong here are targeted by this kind of so-called theology that really co-opts the language of Christianity and does not have any real resemblance to, certainly not that of the work of Christ. Political violence, these are tenets of white Christian nationalism, right? People who adhere to white Christian nationalism theology and ideology, according to their own, to polls taken by folk who talk to them. PRRI is probably one of the most credible research centers out there doing this work, 7 times more likely to engage in political violence. Anti-Muslim sentiment, right? They don't really believe that Muslims should be even in this country. There are candidates that promise to actually get rid of them. It is anti-immigrant, full stop, right? Forget the fact that the Bible talks about once you were a stranger, right? We're all strangers. And the invitation that we are supposed to make to strangers, the hospitality that we are to extend. And in our context, Proctor family, it's anti-Black. It is anti-Blackness on steroids. And so a part of what we have to ask ourselves is, how does that line up with the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? What is it about this is even closely related to it? And it is not other than the words that they use. And one of the things about, as Black people, we're extremely Christocentric, and I'm not a judgment call. I love me some Jesus too. But we are sometimes bamboozled by it, because if folks say Jesus more than twice, it hits our ears. We tune in. They're talking about Jesus. So we often miss what's underlying the kind of theological tropes that they're using. We miss the underlying racism and fascism that they are really actually perpetuating and proclaiming into the world. And we are not able to interrogate it enough to realize that that's not really how it's not embodying what Christ, not what would do, what Christ actually does in the gospel, in the text. We're here tonight. I'm really grateful for Proctor and Dr. Susan Smith, Reverend Marcus, for taking this task on and to be so committed to doing this, because if good theology does not inform public policies and practices, bad theology will, and it honestly really already has.
Okay.
And
So go
can I
ahead.
say just one?
Yeah.
And I'm gonna just like this thing. Why us, right? As Black people, especially, right? We have to own that we've been evangelized and courted by these bad actors, right? And we also already have the theological tools. We already have Black liberation theology. We already have womanist theology. We already have the tenets of building beloved community that Dr. King left us with, right? And we are still the storytellers of America. One of the things is that we are really wrestling for narrative. And we are, if we're going to be the storytellers of America, we really need to take the mic back. In Dr. Hendrick's book, and I'm deeply informed by his scholarship around this more than anyone else, he talks about the salient silent on the left. And no matter how you describe yourself theologically and etc., if we're not the ones that are actually lifting our voice, we don't have to scramble. Just go to the book, go to what you're preaching, go to what you're teaching, go to what we've already been taught by the examples of theologians that have gone before us. Go to the work of Christ, put it side by side with white Christian nationalism, and you automatically are able to see the difference. You're able to see that one theology puts a target on the back of the most vulnerable. The other theology actually says, feed the poor, take care of the naked, go and see about the sick, liberate the captives. One theology actually says, capture more people, right? And so we have to actually be able to make these theological arguments for ourselves and realize that we have what we need to actually do it, but we really just have to start to turn our microphones on. We actually have to start to inform not just the people in our pews, but starting there, the people in our communities, the people in our families, young people in the communities around our congregations, in our institutions, so that they actually understand that this is not so mystic, that we actually already have the foundation, but we also need to actually examine and interrogate our own theology and ask ourselves, are there spaces and places that we are really emulating this kind of theology of hate? And if that's what we're doing, where does that leave our people? I'm going to be quiet. I got a lot more to say, but that at least kind of helps you to frame what that is and why it really matters, you all. 40% of those who believe in this, right? They are willing to engage in violence, right? Philip Gorski talks about this. We've seen the violence. I spent 2 weeks in Buffalo. Went to 7 of those 10 funerals. It matters to us because there will be more Mother Emanuels. There will be more shootings in Dollar Generals like in Jacksonville's. There will be more Mother Ruth Whitfields and others who will die because of this violence if we do not do what we know we're called to do, and actually, in the words of the old folk, go into the highways and the byways and actually help people to understand what's at stake, why it's at stake, and why we should not just go quietly. You're not just going to let somebody come in your house, steal your stuff, and put it on display as if it is theirs. And this is what is literally happening every day, not just in the political arena, but certainly in the theological arena. And many of the people that we all, that some Black people, not we all, but some Black people, we love some of these evangelicals who do everything that they can. They claim to be not racist, but they're anti-Black, right? They emulate our sermons. They do all of the things that are unholy in the name of Jesus, and we listen. We go to their little places, their little conferences. We send our money, and a part of why I do this work is that we need to disrupt that. Even if it wasn't an election year, that's a whole nother story. But we need to disrupt that in our own community. It's somebody else's job to go talk to white evangelicals. But for me in my house, we got to disrupt that to go into our own house, disrupt the kind of theology that targets other folk and that is not of God. We can't have it both ways. And in this season, so much is at stake. The violence, our very lives. Project 2025 has all of us. They got a picture of us, of your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, your grandparents, if you still have them. They have the most vulnerable in mind, and it will take all of us out. So it's going to take all of us being able to disrupt this and to stop it in its tracks, because we already have the playbook ourselves. I'm going to pass the mic.
So powerful. One of the things that gripped me, and one of the reasons I believe that this conversation is necessary, is because they're always talking about, I'm Christian, and then every once in a while somebody will say, well, I'm a Christian nationalist and I'm proud of it. And there really is a difference. And I think too many of us hear Christian and we think traditional, I'm going to say biblical Christianity, where we follow what Jesus taught. But if you notice, with the people who are Christian nationalists, who claim and proudly own their Christian nationalism, they don't talk about Jesus. Have you noticed? They don't talk about Jesus. Yeah. They can hold up the Bible, but they don't talk about Jesus, because Jesus, in fact, the former president's elder son once said, well, we don't need Jesus. He hasn't done very much for us. I mean, you have to listen to that kind of stuff. You have to listen to everything that's going on to understand the seedbed of this Project 2025. And the reason that the moment I got concerned was on January 6th, when all those clowns were going into the Capitol and, disrupting and putting feces on the wall and all that kind of stuff. And those clowns went into one of the chambers, either the House or the Senate, and the guy with the horns on his head stood up and said, wait a minute, we got to pray to the Lord Jesus. And he said, let's lift up holy hands. I thought, what?
Yeah,
what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So,
I think that's what I'm going to talk about.
In person, I usually show that prayer, because in that prayer, he talks about white light, like said, thank you, Jesus, for the white light. And so, yes, that's the problem.
Yeah. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hendricks. Thank you, Dr. Cassandra. I know you have a whole lot more to say. I can feel it in your energy. That's good. Dr. Hendricks wrote this wonderful book. If you have not read it, you should get it. It's all blurred in my thingy, but Christians Against Christianity, How Right-Wing Evangelicals Are Destroying Our Nation and Our Faith. And the very first paragraph in the introduction, he writes, travesty. That's how I would characterize Christianity in America today. A travesty, a brutal sham, a tragic charade, a cynical deceit. Why? Because the loudest voices in American Christianity today, those of right-wing evangelicals, shamelessly spew a putrid stew of religious ignorance and political venom that is poisoning our society, making a mockery of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Dr. Hendricks, it's on you now.
No, thank you, Dr. Smith and my comrade, Dr. Gould. And thank you, the Samuel Proctor Conference, for engaging in this very, very important work, this very important discussion. I think that one reason why people get so confused, as Dr. Gould points out, is that there doesn't seem to be a real clarity about what the gospel is, what the core of the gospel is, what the core of the gospel responsibility is. Folk have all kinds of ideas about what their gospel responsibility is. And a lot of it doesn't go any further than going to church and supporting the pastor, and maybe having a weekly food pantry or something like that. But the core of the gospel is very simple, and Jesus gave it to us. Didn't say it was John 3:16, wasn't anything Paul said. He said the core of the gospel is, or the greatest commandments, as he put it, love your Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And on the social level, on the horizontal level, to love your neighbor as yourself. And love your neighbor as yourself is not just some platitude. It's a commandment to want for your neighbor the same goods, the same freedom, the same liberation, the same security, the same sustenance, the same access to good things in life, the same economic mobility that you want for your family. You should want that for your neighbor as well. But it goes beyond that, because we each would struggle to have those things for our own families, ourselves, and our own loved ones. Is also a commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself is also a commandment to struggle for our neighbors to have the same thing, the same liberation, the same freedom, the same goods, the same wholeness and healthiness in life. In other words, the core of the gospel is love. On the social level is love your neighbor as yourself, which really says to struggle for the common good. That's what the commandment is. And that's what love is about. And that is the antithesis of white Christian nationalism. I think, and for these purposes, I'd call it anti-Christianity, because it does not say anything about love. It doesn't say anything about justice. It's all about just us. It's about individualism, when the biblical witness is always about the common good. It's always about the community. There's not even a word for individual in biblical Hebrew. So that's the first thing. So what is Christian nationalism? Well, Christian nationalism, of course, as Dr. Gould pointed out, Christian nationalism says, white Christian nationalism says that America has always been a Christian nation, and that it's supposed to be a Christian nation, and that it should always be a Christian nation. And that is a lie.
Mhm.
The country was not formed as a Christian nation. More than that, their notion of what makes Christianity, or what would make it a Christian nation, is it is all governed by their skewed, idiosyncratic, just screwed up notion of what the gospel is. But they base their nationalism, and I'm talking about in its most modern instantiation, on their misreading, their, I think, purposeful misreading of a couple biblical passages. The first is Genesis 1:28, which says, have dominion over every living thing that moves upon the earth. It didn't say for any particular group of people to have dominion. It says that humanity is supposed to have a dominion. But they actually have a theology that says that these right-wing white Christian nationalists are supposed to have dominion over the whole earth, and over all of America, of course. I mean, people like Pat Robertson came right out and said that in the past, that is what that it is the right and the responsibility of these right-wing Christians to rule America. They want us all to bow at the altar of their screwed up reading of the Bible. And then they misread Matthew 28:19, that says, tells us to go forth and make disciples of all nations. What they get wrong, though, is the Greek word mathetes, that's translated as disciple, means disciple in the sense of of student or apprentice. In other words, what it says is go forth and make students or teach the gospel to the whole world. It doesn't say to go out and dominate the world, take over the world, go out and be imperialists over the world. But they take these passages as giving them the right to dominate American society and hopefully the world. Dr. Gould talked about its racism. Well, white Christian nationalism it goes way back, but its most recent instantiation really started as recently as 1970. Though many Christian nationalists now will say that this current movement that they're involved in, that it goes back to Roe v. Wade, Roe v. Wade's its legalization of, its legalization of I am so exhausted from traveling that I can't even get my words out. You'll bear along with me. Roe v. Wade legalized.
Taking away the rights of women for have abortions.
Yeah, for abortion. Oh my God.
It's
Lord,
okay.
work with me. Work with me, Lord. But that's not when it started. I mean, in fact, the leaders of the movement admit that when this modern white Christian nationalism started was around 1970, when it started in the soil of racism, and that is when President Carter's IRS, the Carter administration's IRS, ruled that educational institutions that practice segregation as a policy, that they will no longer be entitled to tax exemption or to financial aid, federal financial aid. And these Christian nationalists, they jumped up and they raised hell. And that was what that whole Bob Jones thing might be, that some people might remember. Bob Jones was a rabidly racist school in North Carolina. And they believed in segregation, that that the races should be segregated. And these Christian nationalists got up in arms, and they fought for the right of these institutions to remain segregated and to remain racist. And we're talking about Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, and all of them. And that's when this recent movement started. And so it's always been racist. It's always been hateful. It's always been about trying to dominate all of American society and to make everybody genuflect at the altar of their perverted notion of the Bible. And white Christian nationalist discourse is not, it's anti-Christian also in the sense that it's never about love. It's only about whom and what they do not love. I mean, that includes gay people and Muslims and immigrants, who the Bible says that we should be as concerned about as orphans and widows. They oppose the women who want to assert full autonomy over their own bodies. They're against Black Lives Matter, transgender young people, common sense gun control, labor unions, against a living wage, against teaching America's complete history. And so they're even against vegetarian impossible burgers. These people, their movement is based on hatred and opposition, and that has nothing to do with the gospel. And there are a few criteria that we need to be aware of with them. One thing, they talk about moralism and morality, but their moralism, their moral traditionalism, just seeks to sacralize social hierarchies of race and gender and class and economic status. They want to keep the power. They want to put the power back where it was generations ago, and that's in the hands of rich folks and white folks. They have no problem with dictatorial, authoritarian control. Trump has said that he's going to be a dictator, and they support him. He loves dictators. His best friends are dictators. Viktor Orban from Hungary, and he loves see from China and on down the line. Well, these Christian nationalists support this dictatorial authoritarianism as long as it benefits them. And they have a willingness to use a threat of violence or actual violence. And we've seen that time and time again because they believe that, at least they preach, that God has given them the right to rule over everybody else. And another aspect of his whiteness is that it privileges the white Christian experience and worldview as the only legitimate experience and worldview. And we know that's not the case. That leaves out the majority of human beings on earth. They teach that the country was founded for the benefit of white conservative Christians. They keep talking about the founding of it. Well, in the founding of it, Black people and women had no rights at all. And this is and so when they talk about the founding fathers and all of that, what they're talking about is when they say make America great again, they're talking about going backward. Again, they're not talking about going forward. And it's also patriarchal. They believe that men are best suited to lead in all things. If you've seen some of the madness on the internet, it's about men telling women to stay in their place. We have the Southern Baptist Convention, which is going through all kinds of hell now because they're saying that women don't even have a right to preach in the pulpit. The Christian nationalism is libertarian. And in other words, they believe that government, the only responsibility of government is to protect free market capitalism. They talk about a smaller government and they talk about removing regulations. Well, those are regulatory protections against the depredation of the rich capitalists. Well, the Christian nationalists want to remove those protections. And that's why when you look at Project 2025, it's about dismantling damn near everything as it stands in America and freeing their hands to do whatever they want, freeing the hands of corporate capitalists to make as much money as they want. They want to take away all the rights of workers. They want to dismantle unions, which happen to be the last really bulwark against total corporate oppression. And what they really are involved with, and they really use in the name of God, is that they weaponize fear. They talk about us versus them. Everything with them is us versus them. And so they go as far to support Donald Trump when he calls certain folks animals. He literally calls them animals. And that's, you can look that up, that's online. So white Christian nationalism is the most dangerous force in America today. I would have said up until this weekend that they were winning because they were dominating all of the political discourse. But with this injection of Kamala Harris into the presidential election picture, we have some new energy here, and that might turn the tables. But still, we have to fight back because they control the terms of religious discourse. So we have to stand up and say the gospel is about, in Jesus' words, loving your neighbor as yourself, which means struggling for the common good, which means that we should struggle for policies that look out for the least of these, because if the least of these is all right, then the rest of us will be all right. We have to articulate what a beloved community looks like, and we have to articulate it in biblical terms. Theological concepts are fine, but people need to see chapter and verse. That's why people need to see Matthew 25, 31 through 46. We have to lift that up because that is the primary mode of judgment that Jesus gave us. And it didn't say anything about, it says the way that nations and the people in them will be judged is not by who you sleep with or who you love or even what you believe. We'll be judged by how much we try to do to make a difference in the well-being of the people, and also to try to instantiate justice in the world. We have to become more politically active therefore, in influencing our policy makers. And we must reclaim the language of good and evil, because we've gotten too mealy-mouthed. What we're seeing is an onslaught of evil that is looking to take away the freedom of our children's futures. Evil is when you hurt people in order to serve yourself, or you hurt them just because you can. Like Trump is just he's just a mean-spirited bully. And we have to realize then that this is a matter of life and death for so many. Many have died already. I mean, just by neglect. In Columbia, one of the think tanks at Columbia said that 150,000 people died of COVID because of Trump's unwillingness to stand up and be responsible. And to take it seriously. People are dying because we saw what happened in Charlottesville. And if these Christian nationalists get in office and they are empowered by Donald Trump, there'd be a whole lot more murders. And Trump says he will loose the hands of police. In fact, Project 2025 talks about loosing the hands of police and not making them responsible for their killings that are supposedly in the line of duty. Well, that's going to mean a whole lot more death, and mostly Black death. So this is an important question. And brothers and sisters, we have to look at these folk. It doesn't matter what they call themselves. They are not Christians in this sense. They are anti-Christians. The Bible calls, in 1 John's the only place it talks about an antichrist. Revelation talks about a beast and all that. But 1 John says that antichrist are those who, essentially what it says in essence is that those who teach the opposite of the teachings of Christ in the name of Christ, that they are in opposition to Christ. They are antichrist. He calls them antichrist and uses the plural as well, antichrist. We are in fighting against an anti-Christian movement with a spirit of antichrist, is what 1 John talks about also. And the people who pervade this, they are antichrists, and they must be stopped. And we, as Christians, we're not the only ones who have responsibility, but our responsibility goes very deep to the heart of who we say we are. Because if we really believe in the gospel, then our gospel responsibility is to stand up and to redefine, to reclaim and remind people what true Christianity is. And that is the responsibility of true Christianity to stomp out this evil onslaught of white Christian nationalism. And I look forward to our conversation.
Powerful presentation, Dr. Hendricks. I remember, this is something that I talk about all the time. A lot of people say I'm a Christian, and they'll say the Bible says, the Bible says. But when they say the Bible says, they don't talk about what the gospel say. There is a difference. There's a difference. And I find myself troubled when, people say I'm Christian and they only talk about Christianity when it's Christmas time and Easter. Those are the two times. So they'll acknowledge that Jesus was born and Jesus died, but in between they'll talk about the Bible. And in the Bible, they'll do Hebrew scriptures and they'll talk about the Pauline epistles, but that gospel thing, that stuff that Jesus taught us to do, they completely ignore. And that's why this conversation is so important, because that's what the people who are driving this Project 2025 are trying to drive us back to. Kevin Roberts,
may I just say this? One way you can identify them, and I thank you for this, is that there are two words they never use. That's love and justice.
Right.
I mean, that's an easy way to identify them. You're so right. And that's why it's important to lift up what the core of the gospel is. They don't even know. Well, too many Christians know what the core of the gospel is. I'm sorry to cut you off, but this is burning my heart. That is, most people don't. What you're saying, many Christians in our churches are that way to non-Black churches as well.
Right.
And so we are, the reason that these people have gotten so far is because we've been so lazy. We've been so busy celebrating all the time and hollering and shouting and being an audience instead of a real congregation working to change this country. And we have to change that. If we're going to win this battle, we have to really delve, we have to reclaim the gospel, and we have to study the gospel and reclaim it. And our pastors need to uphold their responsibility to raise the consciousness of people and not just perform and for shouts and amens. This is a very, very serious thing because our churches have allowed this thing to get this far. Look at our denominations. What denominations? Look at the Black denominations. Who's really stood up against something that is aimed at destroying our people to a great extent? None of the Black denominations have done much at all, and very few churches have done much. There are some now. We know Freddie and a bunch of others, and we know Trinity, and we know that there are exceptions around the country, but most churches have not fulfilled their gospel responsibility to fight against this evil. And that's why we have this biblical ignorance, and that's why these people can get away with it. Forgive me for interrupting.
No, that's good. That's exactly what we want, because what we're seeing and what's at the seedbed of Project 2025 is this Christianity. I'm a Christian. That's what they're saying, but it's Christianity without the Christ. It's without Jesus. And this Robert Jones wrote or referred to Frederick Douglass, who cut to the heart of the problem with white Christianity. And he said, the garb of Christianity in the church covered by the injustices of slavery in the social realm and Christian theology gave religious sanction to punishment and cruelty in the personal realm. The churches conferred respectability and even elevated esteem on white Christian slaveholders, and the theological blessing of slavery paradoxically lobotomized white Christian consciousness, severing what natural moral impulses there may have been. So there's been this historically, there's been a break between the way many white folks, I won't say all white folks, but many white folks understand Christianity and the Bible. So they'll say, I read the Bible. It's in the Bible. And I think, y'all correct me, or Dr. Gold or Dr. Hendricks or both, but I think what people are most comfortable with, and I think what is the seedbed, again, of this Christian Project 2025 attack on, or ignoring of Christianity, what they don't want is for people to feel like that Jesus has that type of control over them. Nobody likes the messages of Jesus. I mean, it's difficult to do. You don't want to love your neighbor. You don't want to do all of that. So you go away and you go into the Pauline epistles, and you like the hierarchical stuff that Paul writes about. It gives you some freedom to have, some people are better, some people are worse. That's what they call the Bible, and that's what they call their Christianity, but that's not Christianity. Am I wrong, or am I in the right track?
That's right, but that again goes down to biblical illiteracy, and it's our fault, because what you're saying, many Black people do the exact same thing, and that has a lot to do with our leadership. There should be no lack of clarity of what our responsibility is to the gospel of Jesus Christ. But we see few places where that seems to be understood. Folks should be out there fighting to establish a world of justice. The most often occurring concept in the Bible is mishpat. We translate as justice or judgment in terms of discerning between right and wrong, good and evil. You hear almost nothing preached about justice. That's the most important concept in the Bible. That should be talked about all of the time. And not only that, but I write about this in my latest book here. The second most occurring ethical concept is tzedakah, which is wrongly translated as righteousness, in terms of personal piety. It really means doing right in society, all right, or doing justice in society. And what's interesting is that these two terms are paired throughout the Bible more than any other terms, justice and righteousness. And you put them together, it means social justice. Duh, that's simple. That is the most important foundational concept of our faith. But where do we hear this? Where is this preached? Where is this taught? It's not taught in many places, and I can't blame folk who haven't been taught this. But our pastors should be reading enough to know this, and that's why I lecture on it, and I spent time writing about it. So what I'm saying is that we have to really look at ourselves and strengthen ourselves and gird up our own loins to fight these people by really focusing on what it means to be a follower of Jesus and not just a Christian. And I'm speaking to the Black church because I'm so disappointed that we have abdicated our responsibility to the point that these jokers are so close to taking over the country. They're close to taking over the country.
That's exactly right. And that's their plan. Kevin Roberts, who's he's the president of the Heritage Foundation, wrote that this plan, Project 2025, is about securing our God-given individual rights to live freely against a woke threat. Today, the left is threatening the tax-exempt status of churches and charities that reject woke progressivism, he claims, without evidence. And he says they will soon turn to Christian schools and clubs with the same totalitarian intent. Dr. Gold, what do you think about that? But what do you think about what he's saying?
My house is loud now, so I'm like, so they've already turned to it, right? And so this Louisiana, the Supreme Court passing, putting the 10 Commandments into public schools. It's one thing if you got a private school, a Christian school, put anything in there you want to put in, but in a public school, imposing Christianity on everyone. To Dr. Hendricks' point, what both of you all were talking about earlier, again, Black church, right? We a part of the problem why we're silent in the public square is because we're silent in the house, because we've not actually dealt with it in the house. And so for me, the reason I'm at Martha's Vineyard on here with y'all is because we got to have more of these house meetings so that we can disentangle ourselves, because we are our people are going to be at risk for the policies. But these calls on our lives is more than about, how many people are following us on social media and the cool places we get to go and what we get to do. I'm afraid of God changing God's mind about me if I'm not actually preaching and teaching the gospel and informing people about justice. And since it is a house meeting, you get labeled, that's the social justice preacher. Well, hell, what are you? Shouldn't we all be social justice preachers, right? And so that is a part of the work, y'all. That is a part of the work of the disentangling ourselves from that kind of theology that is actually killing our own people. And so that's the work that we got to do. And we got to get that right in the house so that we can go outside and fight together, because they are here. They're not going anywhere. They've taken up all of the airways, right? You got IG, you got all of the things. And so instead of posting all the frivolous stuff, reposting something that's not true, post about the gospel of Christ. What do you believe? What do you really believe the gospel is about? And that's the place that we really have to be. We need to disentangle ourselves so that we might keep our children and our children's children and man them out of the tentacles of white Christian nationalists. Honestly, that's work of denominations, institutions, all of our organizations. That's what we should be working on.
What happens to us as people if Project 2025 was put into place, what happens to us? What happens if this forcing of Christian nationalism as the state religion required of the country, in the country? What happens? This is the step I want people to think about. What happens? What would you feel? Is it a danger that somebody can say, you can no longer preach the gospel of Jesus like you've been doing it? You know, you have to, because that's how prescriptive these types of
Exactly.
regimes are. What happens
Exactly.
to us? I need for y'all to talk about it so people can hear what the
It's
possibilities are.
something overarching. The overarching thing is that, well, having the black folks is that our quality of life will be diminished. You know, we'll have fewer rights. I mean, as we know, Project 2025, it's 800 pages, almost 900 pages long, because they've written ways to take over every aspect of American society and judiciary, everything in politics, right? And so, for instance, you look at education. They want to get rid of loan programs that, you know, disproportionately, you know, help us. I mean, they want to get rid of the Department of Education, so there won't be protections against against discrimination, on down the line. I mean, they want to get rid of the civil service, and 20% of the civil service is Black people. That would destroy a huge part of the Black middle class. I mean, it is so insidious and so nefarious that even Donald Trump is saying he had nothing to do with it. Mr. Evil himself. And so the reason we have to fight Project 2025, because to a great extent, it will destroy the future of our children. They don't even want our children will not even be able to learn about their own history. Librarians will go to jail for pornography if they have any materials, any sex education material for students. I mean, this thing is really sick, and we really have to fight against it. So, in a nutshell, what will it do? It will put Black folk in the trick bag like we have not been in for generations, and in some ways, it will make our lot even worse than that.
Yeah, and you know, a candidate that's promising bloodbaths, which is calling the dogs, basically, right? Calling the warriors, calling those who are willing to risk their lives because they're bowing at the altar of that devil, right? And so the safety nets will be gone, Medicare, Medicaid, those things that actually protect the most vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Those little soccer moms, those 3 little soccer moms who started in an obscure county, not in Miami-Dade, in some obscure county in Florida, 3 soccer moms in 2021. As of July of last year, they had 245 chapters of Moms for Liberty. They are in every single state of the continuous 48.
Explain what they do.
So they basically go and take over school boards, right? The books that are banned in Florida, it is because Moms for Liberty actually infiltrated school boards. We have some organizers in Florida, and the NAACP talks about you at home, it's a school board meeting, ain't nobody paying attention because you got something else to do. They are at those school boards. They take up all of the public slots. So every school board meeting, people get to talk. They sign up for maybe 50 of those slots. I talked to people in Florida sitting in school board meetings that went on until midnight because these little white Karens got together. They take up all these slots and they make a list of complaints about all of the things. So then they get to tell the school board, even if they don't get a seat on the school board. But now half of them are on the school board in Black Lanta. So it is not just, they started in some smaller cities, but if it's not already in your city, it's coming to a city near you. They run for the offices of the school board. And in the places that they don't run for office, if 50 parents show up and only 2 usually show up, and they're loud and wrong about these books that are poisoning our children, making our children feel bad, all of these things, when they start having those discussions, then they get to enact the policy at the school board. Well, who's living with the policy at the school board? The school is already hard for our children because they're often ostracized and treated bad, particularly if they're in the minority. You don't see people that look like you. Now you can't even open a book that has a face that looks like you. And so it's very like innocuous. It kind of goes under the radar, but those are the things that we have to worry about, right? Our children are already on the pipeline of prison in the school lines. And so we don't disrupt this, you all. We are the people, and I know we think that we can make it. All of this talking about, I'm not voting. Maybe that's changed with the news of yesterday. I don't know. Our ancestors could make it through this stuff. Most of us are not equipped because we were born with a set of rights that were privileges that we still want to have.
And that's what the people want to take away. They think that woke for people who are behind Project 2025 means that too many people have too many rights. They don't like that.
Yes.
That's why so much is at stake. There's a question. How does this panel suggest that Black people respond, react, and correct this white Christian regime that we are now confronted with? When do we stop having to defend our humanity? I'm going to answer that last one myself. Never. A luta continua. As long as you are Black in this world, you're going to have to struggle with that. But the first part of the question, Dr. Gold and Dr. Hendricks, what do you say?
Well, I think that we've been talking about that. I mean, one thing that's very, very important is disrupting this overarching narrative that we're not contesting enough. There are people, like, give you an example, this profane, ignorant wench, Marjorie Taylor Greene, talks about being a Christian. You have people like Laura Loomer, these hateful, ignorant people. And, we need to, that's just a small example, but we need to contest this stuff. When you have someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about standing up for Christianity, there should be a deluge. And she's all potatoes, but I'm just giving that example. We need to contest what they're talking about. We need to contest Christian nationalism wherever we see it. We need to contest the ones who are supporting Donald Trump. And we need to do it over and over and over and over again, because that's how they're winning. They're repeating their lies over and over and over again because they want to win. It's almost like we don't want to win, or we think that we can't. But it's everybody has, most people have Facebook and Twitter accounts and other kinds of social media accounts. We should be reposting and reposting every day. If anyone knows me, know I do it all the time. I take too much time to do it, but it has to be done over and over again. When you see some foolishness, contest it. And not only that, contest it in our churches. Not in an oppositional way, but in a loving way to raise consciousness. Ask questions. Pastors don't want to be embarrassed, but talk to them on the side. Say, Reverend, can we talk about this, or can we do that? Instead of going to the ushers annual, or in addition going to ushers annual, can we go to the State House? Can we get the pastors in the city together to form a unified arm and have a rally to raise consciousness? Can we start putting out newsletters? Can we insert something in the bulletin that explains it and doesn't challenge the tax exempt status? We need to do all this because we are in a war. They're winning the war because they're winning the ideological war, because their Christianity is not religious, it's ideological. It is an ideology is about interest. So their Christianity is whatever serves their interest, and that should become clear. And we must call them we must call what they're doing anti-Christian, not just unchristian. It's anti-Christian, repeated over and over again. And sir, I'm not saying you're not a Christian. I'm saying what you're saying is anti-Christian. And I'll show you why it's anti-Christian. Because it's against love your neighbor as yourself. It's against justice. It's against taking care of the least of these. How dare you talk about cutting Medicare and Medicaid? How dare you talk about trying to overturn the Affordable Care Act? Don't you know that we have a responsibility to care for the suffering and the least of these? And we need to do that and say that over and over again, and as loudly and as articulately as we can.
You're absolutely right, and you're generous. I call people Christian nationalists, white Christian nationalists. I call them religious, so they got some kind of religion, but it's not Christianity.
No, it's
right?
it's Christo-fascism. That's what it
because
is.
it's not, another question in this chat, Dr. Gold, can you describe how or if theocracy is woven into the authoritarian dictatorial rhetoric?
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that well, not just I do believe it is woven into that rhetoric, right? They actually believe, right, that there is some divine engagement that they are having. Like God what they really believe is that God sent Donald Trump, right?
Yeah.
God sent Donald Trump. So this authoritarian comes because it is like bringing forth the end of the earth for God. It is bringing forth the Jesus coming back. And so it is really this the way that they have combined God and country. It is toxic and it's wrong, right? It is just wrong. And so for them, theocracy, the authoritarian or fascist government becomes the embodiment of theocracy. It is bringing forth God's will on earth.
Yes.
And it's about power and politics and money.
Absolutely.
It's about
and
God
it's always power over, right?
Right.
It's never power with. What Dr. Hendricks was talking about, dominion. And so some of us are falling into that mess. Y'all have dominion conferences and you chosen and all of this. If you chose, if there's just the chosen, what happens to the unchosen, right?
Right. And they're fine with that.
You fine with it, right? And so that's the mess that we have to disrupt, you all.
And that's what we're sliding back into. If we don't stand up, like Dr. Hendricks says, if we don't confront it, that boy, MacArthur, what's his name? Robert MacArthur.
Yeah, John MacArthur.
John MacArthur. I mean, he's not shy
throw those
about
commentaries away.
Yeah, he preached that social justice is anti-biblical.
Yeah, I wrote about that in the
like
Christians
crazy.
Against Christianity. He actually, and 11,000 pastors signed on.
That's what I'm saying. And so there were boldness. Somebody's asking, what can we do? If we were bold, the image that comes to my mind, I keep mentioning it. So those of you who have heard me say it before, please bear with me. But that picture of that sister, that young woman in that long dress or jumpsuit or whatever, standing in the street somewhere. Was it in Ferguson?
Yeah.
It might have been in Ferguson. But she was standing face to face with an officer who was in full riot gear with his guns, and she was standing there like, come on with your best, whatever. That was courage. And I think that we sometimes maybe we're a little bit too timid about talking about what the gospel requires. I mean, because it is hard. It is hard. It's easy to use the Bible as your justification for mowing people down and taking away their stuff. But it is a difficult thing to say, even though I would like to slap you because you have gotten on my last nerve, I can't do because of what the gospel tells me to do. But there's power in that. And what these people, I think, what the Project 2025 is pushing a notion of religious strongman, religious strength as something that, makes you bow to violence and use violence for the purpose of hurting other people. And I think that if we understand that, I think it might inspire more of us to say, oh no, we're not going to do that. We are not going to do that. Our ancestors didn't make it through to do what they did in order for us to be here by sinking to a level of violence crouched in religious language. They didn't do that.
But wait, sister, I agree with you, but you know, part of our failing, I think, is that these people have been able to do what they want without fearing any
Right,
consequence.
right.
And I'm going to tell you, if the three of us in the room and somebody comes in to try to harm you, or my responsibility, as Jesus says, to protect the sheep, the lamb, the innocent, my responsibility is, if I have to hurt somebody to protect the innocent, I hate to say it, if I have to draw their blood or take their life, to protect the innocents, then I have a responsibility to do that.
Yeah, I get that.
I mean, I'm not calling for warfare, though I did grow up as a street soldier of the Black Nationalism movement. But I saw a clip today where they have these Proud Boy Nazis in Nashville,
Mhm,
and they're harassing some little black boys. I'm talking
mhm.
about boys who are about the puberty age. Now, nationalist days, we would have been there to make sure that everything to contest them, not necessarily to fight them, though we
But to
did
show
quite a
them some
bit.
strength. Yeah, I get
Oh
that.
yeah, we need
Yeah,
to do that, and that's why I still love the Nation of Islam's Fruit of Islam. They got together, and that's what I'm saying is that we've allowed them to give us
yes.
this namby-pamby sense of what Christianity is supposed to
But
be. But
that
you
they
look at
don't
the
follow
Gospel of
themselves.
Mark, throughout the Gospel of Mark, Jesus was angry. Was angry all the time, not for himself, but because of the way innocents are being treated. And then when he went in and cleansed the temple, turned the
Right.
temple out, he wasn't playing. Why do you think those people didn't grab him, knocking their money on the ground and all that? Well, they probably said this Negro's crazy, or it was violence or the threat of violence. I mean, and we need to do that to fight evil. Now, I'm not suggesting that we use violence, but we have to assert strength, which is what we're
Absolutely.
not doing. If we
Absolutely.
showed up in the thousands, um, in Nashville, if we showed up with 4 or 5 buses
They
and
would back
stood there
down.
like this, there'd be a
Yeah.
different
Yeah, we
story.
wouldn't have to fire a shot. They would back down. That would scare them.
Yeah.
There's an interesting question from one of our persons. She says, do you all realize that the Republican Party was the party established on biblical principles and the values of human rights? I don't think that's true, but
No,
one of y'all
they were more the Republican Party. Republican Party supported Reconstruction. Um, uh, the Republicans at times were on the right side, but it was never about us. It was about the Union, and there was no biblical principles involved at all.
Yes.
No,
yeah,
I don't know. And that's
right.
what they're saying now. And we see them talk about, and a lot of people falling for this, saying that the Democrats are the racists. The Democrats were the
Well,
plan, blah blah blah. Yeah, that's
but if
true.
there was a shift, y'all need to
There's a
understand.
shift,
Yeah.
and
There was
that's
a
the
shift.
point.
The
That was the point.
Republicans, so Abraham Lincoln was the president, and there was going to be the Civil War, and he needed more black people he needed some more people to fight that war. So he was not for black people. He did not
It
want
was
to
for
bring,
saving this
he was for
country.
saving the
Right.
Exactly.
Union.
And
He
the
was not
party has shifted, right?
right. He
Like,
didn't
Exactly.
believe in
yeah,
equity and
It
right.
shifted
equality
in
for
the
black
40s
people,
and
and
the
he said it
50s,
out
That's right.
loud.
and
Absolutely. So then what
specifically in
happened?
the 60s with civil rights, with the Civil Rights Act, when the Dixiecrats went over
They
to
moved
become
over to the Republican Party.
Republicans.
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
So
but
That's
people
exactly
falling for
correct.
that falsehood.
yeah,
Yeah. I want
everybody
to
really needs to understand that, because the Republicans or the MAGAs will saying we're the party of Lincoln. Well, yeah, y'all were mad at Lincoln when he did that. So
when he
people
actually did that.
Southerners who were in there
Right.
moved over to the Democratic Party, and then they formed a very solid block, and they kind of stayed put until I think it was when Franklin Delano Roosevelt came along and did the New Deal.
Yeah.
But they don't like
So the
all this
partnership.
helping quote the least of these, so then they moved from Democrat into the Republican. So they're shifting back and forth, but do not accept at face value when they say we're the party
Absolutely not.
of Lincoln, and think that that is some kind of
They'd kill Lincoln again.
Right.
Lincoln
they
came,
killed them.
Republicans would kill him.
Right. And they co-opted Christianity, like
They
from the
co-opted
beginning. Let's be really
Christianity.
clear about that. I think the other thing that we have to name, and thank you, my dear sister, Reverend Alexander, that bloodshed in the streets, right? One of the other things that we're going to have to do is not just educate our people, but prepare our people, y'all. Like, I don't care who wins in November. I do care. But no matter who wins in November, there is going to be anarchy in the streets. And so, part of the work I'm doing is trying to also help people to get some sanctuary congregations, just like you have them for immigration. Where will our people go to be safe? How will we be able to actually, the least of these, the most vulnerable, the children, the widows, the orphans, right? How will we actually be able to keep them safe? And we actually have to have some real plans around that. We need to have some organizational plans for our organizations that come in for us, right? You need to have a personal safety plan. You need to have plans for keeping the community safe. The election ain't gonna be over with until February, March. Like, let's be clear, right? If they declared the last election was stolen, what will happen, right? Those are also the ways in which, somebody asked about what do Black people need to do. We got to walk and chew bubble gum at the same time, but we have to make sure that our people are safe and put in the mechanism, practical mechanism in the coming days. Faith in Action is putting together some of their work with some pastors and others, but we got to keep our people safe.
Right.
Bloodbath can't come and we just like, we didn't believe it. We didn't know what was going to happen. We cannot be unprepared for that.
So, as we're getting close to the end, we're firing up and it's really good stuff. But I do really want to encourage one of our members in the chat says that our history is wrong. We are not wrong. The Democratic Party did not kill Lincoln. That was a man named John Wilkes Booth. And people were mad at Lincoln for issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. I don't know what he was. He might not have been at any party, but he was an individual. But he reflected the sentiment of many white people who resented Lincoln freeing enslaved people because enslaved people were necessary to build the economy of the South. It was always about money in terms of, the slavery was about making this country, talking about making this country great, making this country wealthy. And so when that edict was issued by President Lincoln, people were mad at him. So please, 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 because you're going to hear so much crazy stuff, please read the history, please read it and understand where we are. So I'm going to give you both about 2 minutes each to do a closing statement, and we're going to wind this up for this evening. But for those of you who are here, thank you. And we're going to, we record these and we will have the links for these conversations available. Julia let us know in a couple of days later on in the week. So we do want you to take these conversations. We do want you to listen to them. We do want you to share them with your family and friends because we need to, and this needs to be an ongoing effort to get the truth out so we all understand what Project 2025 is and how it affects us. Dr. Gold, can you give us a couple of sentences to close us out?
Yeah, I'm going to just really leave you with the words of my beloved Malcolm X. When white America catches a cold, Black America has pneumonia. And in this season, we have to be ready to shield ourselves from the virus that is already amongst us. If we think COVID took many loved ones, and it did, including in my family, white Christian nationalism left uncontested will do even more. As Dr. Hendricks says, we have a gospel responsibility to say something and to do something.
Thank you. Dr. Hendricks.
Thank you so much. Thank you both for this very bracing and important conversation. I see in the chat that my dear sister Andrea Alexander makes the point that political parties are not pure and all have agendas. As Christians, we should have no allegiance to a political party. Our allegiance is to God and the fulfillment of the gospel message of love and justice for all. And I think that's very important, that our commitment must be to principle. It must be to social justice, and that should be the standard that we use for who we support, what policies we support, what policies that we offer, and that we craft. Those who believe in the gospel really have to stand up and start acting like it, and that is how the forces of justice will get stronger. Because as long as we're predictable, we don't have any strength. But now, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting we go half-cocked and start a third party and dilute our strength. I'm talking about really insisting that those that we elect in our government, that they be held to a certain kind of standard, and that the standard be one of, are you standing for justice? Are the policies that you espouse, are they justice-based? And let's look at the policies that you've already promoted. Were they justice-based? Were they love-based? Were they about serving the least of these? And I think that point that she's making is so very important. That's how we start changing this country. And lastly, love your neighbor as yourself means to struggle for the common good. And if we start struggling for the common good, that would and that's going to take time. It might not see it in our lifetimes, but in our children's lifetimes, that would transform this country, make it more loving, and make it more just, and make it more healthy, and give our people a real chance to get from under this evil and hatred that we've been blanketed by ever since we've been brought to these shores.
Thank you so much. So if you don't leave, if anything else, just leave with the understanding, even if you don't understand all the differences, with the understanding that there is a difference between Christianity and Christian nationalism. I want to thank all of you for being here. Next week, our third session in this series, we're going to have for men only conversation, because men have some conversation. They need to be talking about some stuff. I will not be in the room, and the men will have the freedom to talk about what they want to talk about, their issues, their concerns, or whatever is ticking them off, and also how Project 2025 will affect their lives. That's
wonderful.
The whole goal of this series, is to teach people about how Project 2025 will affect their lives. So I want to thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Reverend Damian
And
Durr.
thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Y'all, I'm supposed to, this is my bedtime. I don't want to go to, my head is
Thank
all
you,
spinning
sis. We
around,
appreciate you
but
for holding
this
torch and then for
yeah,
inviting us in for collaboration.
Thank you. So all of you who came, I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Damian Durr, but all of you who came, stay on. After Reverend Damian gets done, we have a closing video for you. Reverend Damian.
Thank you again, Reverend Sue. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Hendricks and Dr. Gould, for sharing with us on tonight. I've seen obviously a multitude of different comments, but we all know that it was a significant good use of time, because it's never a frivolous use of time when we are telling the truth and shaming the devil. Because part of what I believe as in terms of where we are is also a result of progress that's been made and challenges, right, that have also been made to white supremacy at levels that they never anticipated, particularly obviously with genetic annihilation, because we also know right at the core of this, it is the shrinking numbers that white folks are experiencing and what they must do, obviously, to fight and combat that. So we do thank you all so much for sharing. Thank you all for giving us language, because oftentimes what we need is a broader lens and the language necessary to offer divine clapbacks against lies, against the violence, and against the vitriol that continues to be pervasive. And we, of course, are grateful for the work that the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference has been doing. So the Proctor Conference has demonstrated a moral witness and a moral authority that has continued to keep their foot on the necks of the devil. And I think the word reminds us that we have been given the power to tread on the head of the lion and the snake. So thank you all for reminding us tonight, through equipping us with truth-telling inspiration and information that helps us to continue to be bold and radical in our really standing 10 toes down with what I like to call the holy healer from the hood who offer free health care to the most vulnerable. That's how I like to identify who Christ is, a bottom-up hermeneutic of somebody who spoke truth to the powerful and obviously spoke life and truth to the powerless. And so we thank all of you for joining us tonight. I know that the other conversation is going on, Men for Harris. So I saw some people are obviously jumping off to get on that conversation with Roland Martin. But again, thank you all for joining us tonight, those who possibly joined us last week, and those who may be joining us for the first time. And we, of course, ask you to continue to sow and share into the work and ministry that the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference does. Those of you all who know what the Proctor Conference has meant and what the Proctor Conference means in the times in which we live currently. So we ask you to continue to partner with us. And if opportunity presents itself, sow a seed so that we can continue to provide you with these kinds of conversations and continue to do the work that reflects the work of Christ as a prophetic witness that has enlivened and enlightened us to tell the truth and to shame the devil. So Reverend Sue and Reverend Marcus, thank you all so much for your leadership. Thank you for organizing these conversations. Your work is not in vain. And we look forward to next week's conversation with brothers that we'll be having some dialogue and some reflection as there are different interpretations about what Black men really think. And we hope to gain some insight as brothers will be sharing their thoughts and perspectives that we also hope to share that. Lastly, this conversation is available on YouTube and it was on Facebook, others who have been asking. And please take advantage of some of the things that were mentioned in the chat. There were a treasure trove of resources that were mentioned in the chat so that you can help inform your churches, inform your families, and inform your communities. But we look forward to the ongoing conversation and stay tuned to the Proctor Conference as we also plan to be sharing some more information that reflects what these conversations bore out and some other tools and resources to help continue to arm us for the times in which we live. So I think we do have a video and we thank you all for joining us. Hope everyone has a wonderful night.
Thank you.
This next song that we're going to do with the choir is called Ella's Song. It's named for Ella Baker. Ella Baker was a staunch fighter, a staunch advocate for young people and their involvement in the civil rights movement, one who would sit for hours and listen as young people discussed and debated strategies for how they would move next in whatever direction they decided they wanted to go. These are Ella Baker's words. They were set to music by Bernice Johnson Regan. Ella's Song.
There's a lot of things going on in the world right now. There's a lot of freedoms being threatened. Think about it. Here we go. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Until the killing of black men, black mother sons is as important as the killing of a white man, a white mother son. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. No, no, we who believe in freedom cannot rest. You know, that which touches me most is that I had the chance to work with people, passing on to others that which was passed on to me. To me, young people come first. They have the courage of where we fail. And if I could but shed some light as they carry us through the gale, we who believe, come on, we cannot rest. Say it like you know it now. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. Hey, struggling myself don't mean a whole lot. I've come to realize that teaching others to stand and fight it is the only way I struggle.
absolutely powerful.
God bless you all. God bless you and thank you and have a good evening. We did that in memory and respect for Bernice Reagan Johnson.
Amen.
So God bless you.
Amen.